you've got 15 minutes in total. So however you want to. We've got a Diamond Harbour Community Association one, and then we've got a personal one from you.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Madam Chair, my understanding is there's 10 minutes for the Diamond Harbour Community Association, then 5 minutes for Pete Simpson.
Yes, okay. That's right. Absolutely right.
Right.
Yep.
Thank you. Just to introduce the association, I'm the chair of the association. The Community Association has been running as an entity since the 1930s in one shape or form or another. We have good representation and membership from the community. We also run the community hall. We run the website and the Diamond Harbour Herald newspaper, and support a range of other activities in the community. So we're a well-founded and grounded group. I'm chair of the committee. Pete is the deputy chair of the committee, and we have a submission here. Pete will start off the submission. I'll finish the submission. We hope to do that in 5 minutes and give you time for questions, and then I'll leave time for Pete to undertake his own personal submission on the long-term plan. So over to you, Pete. You're starting off.
Thank you, Richard. Good morning. Thank you very much for taking the time to hear our submission. The association made a submission for increased funding for a number of activities. The long-term plan contained a range of funding focused primarily on core and legal categories, and we felt there was room for additional funding for some of the key issues that the community have faced and that the association have lodged in their submission. The community lost a significant asset with the Godley House demolition following the earthquakes, and a great deal of work has been undertaken by the community association to consult with the community about what could potentially replace that building and what the future use of that site could be. And there was great concern, I think, in the community that that's a potential piece of land the council could foreseeably sell and thus remove what is a core component of the Diamond Harbour region, which is the village centre, the focal point for the community. And it's also the transportation hub connection point with Littleton and the city through the ferry service. We've submitted that we would like to continue the great work that the association and the community have put in around planning for the future development of that site, recognising that the funding limitations across the board, and we are seeking funding simply to continue that planning effort on behalf of the community. And that's by way of developing a specific plan for set of plans for that particular site, but more broadly, the development of what we've termed a quasi-master plan. Now, of course, the council have heard a lot about master plans, and we recognise that a number of those have stalled simply through funding shortfalls, but nonetheless, having a plan for the community means that the community actually has something to engage in terms of understanding its future, where we're going and how we might achieve our future vision or objectives as a community. And so we're seeking funding for a planning effort for and on behalf of our regional community, recognising that it has significant growth potential, and that is being witnessed through the changing demographic with the arrival of more and more young families, a lot of building activity, and the long-term plan itself, which has funded the Inner Harbour Road to the tune of $2.5 million over the next 5 or 6 years, based on increased levels of service for that region. I'd like to move on to the third funding area, where we seek funding to improve the safety and risk around the ferry terminal wharf at Diamond Harbour Terminus. We've had some health and safety incidents there, in particular someone falling in the water through lack of a reasonable handrail and also improvement to the steps. We recognise there's a long-term potential to really develop that facility to be really fit for purpose, but in the interim we're seeking some funding just to mitigate the existing risks around passengers moving on and off of that ferry. And speaking of the ferry, I think it's quite clear that as part of the Littleton Port recovery, that the terminus in Littleton itself is of significant concern to our community, and obviously a lot of submissions going into that planning process. But certainly there's a need for an improvement around whatever is decided in terms of infrastructure and making that fit for purpose as a passenger point of contact in the wider network. Richard.
Thanks. Moving on to the remaining items within our submission. First one, in terms of asset ownership, the committee has a position which I think is quite clearly outlined there. I don't need to say anything more about it at the moment. But just note that Pete is in a minority on the committee and has a separate point of view which he'll include in his own personal submission. In terms of the disposal of surplus land, there was an item attached called I think it's called the Property Action Plan, that was attached on the website coming below the long-term plan, which was essentially misleading in the sense it didn't actually say that those action plans were not necessarily being approved in whole or in part by the council. And that caused a lot of concern in the community because we actually thought that the Property Action Plan that talked about fast-track asset sales for the land up behind the Diamond Harbour settlement would be undertaken. And those areas have got very important public walking tracks and also an area of restoration with the Diamond Harbour walkway through it, where the community has been negotiating for over a year with the council and the Environment Canterbury for a restoration program through the Zone Implementation Committee and funding. And so there's important things. We don't like fast-track asset sales. Also, that proposed that the land underneath the Communities Council down at the Community Centre and the Medical Centre should also be disposed of fast-track. So we have no confidence in the property section's proposals, and that also want to note that the property section's actions in respect of the restoration project have held up final approval of that project, and we're unable to undertake planting this season because of that. The other points about purchase of reserve land I think are quite clear. Same with the reopening Evans Pass Road, just to note that we don't particularly like the approach that the council's agreed to for that reopening of the road. We entirely support the reopening of the road. We believe that you've chosen a very expensive and destructive option, and if you're short of money, I think you should have gone for a cheaper option. In terms of the harbour wastewater discharge, please continue to leave that on track, as you have in the long-term plan. You've committed yourself previously to getting that wastewater out of the harbour. And just to note that there are a community group that's hoping to set up a reserves committee there to ensure that progress is made on the reserves management plan. I'll stop there. Thank you.
You mentioned the restoration planting program. Can you just tell us about that and how that was season?
That's in a gully behind the township and on council land, which is freehold land, and that we've negotiated with Environment Canterbury, that are the funding provider for it, for the restoration work under their Immediate Steps program. And the Zone Implementation Committee supports that. We've spent over a year negotiating. We got to what was a final document, which we understood the council staff had approved, and then the senior council people refused to sign it because they wanted no long-term commitment to the protection of that piece of land. And it's the Community Association's view that we don't want to engage in a replanting program for restoration of that gully unless the council is prepared to put in some kind of commitment not to have it disposed of and necessarily destroyed.
By the playing fields, by the church?
No, that's above the actual settled township between it and what's called Bayview Road. It's a very large area of land that was freehold in the council's ownership now, originally purchased by the Banks Peninsula Council for holding for future subdivision and development.
Thank you.
In terms of the request for funding for a master plan, 2 questions. First of all, have you got any idea as to the quantum of funding, how much would be required to do that? And secondly, if there was a small amount of funding able to be put on budget rather than perhaps a larger amount, would you consider something that just addressed the Diamond Harbour Centre to be beneficial rather than the whole of the Southern Bays?
Without going back to the association to put those questions, I can only answer, I think, how I feel they would interpret those. The quantum would be based on a significant amount of voluntary input from the community, which would be obviously be gratis. But I think a minimal sum of $10,000 to $20,000 would ensure that we had some professional input into the framing of that planning process to ensure that it complied with or met with the requirements for council and ECAN and so forth and the other planning efforts that exist today. Secondly, the question around the breadth of the planning scope. I think certainly the community's core focus is on that particular site and the redevelopment of the village centre, and that the wider planning effort is probably a lesser concern to the community, and therefore, yes, I think we would be in agreement with that proposal.
Just briefly, we had another deputation about the peninsula and Purell Headland and the possible, well, asking council to purchase that piece of headland. So it was described to us as having lovely sand, and at times it may. And also, though, when the tide's out, we understand it's quite silty. What would be your take on or how would you describe, that piece of beach?
We have two headlands in question. One is Maupuku Point that leads across to Quail Island, mostly muddy around it. And then you have the other headland called Purell Headland, which leads to Ripapa Island. Purell Headland was on the market some 4 years ago. The council went to negotiations right through to your chief executive level, but the sellers wouldn't accept the price. That has 3 beautiful bays on it, sandy bays on it, and would provide access to Ripapa Island. So if we prefer, actually, if there's going to be any council involvement in purchase of headlands, that we prefer that Purell Headland be purchased over Maupuku Point. But I noticed that Purell Headland is now under offer, so that opportunity may have gone. But we did make the note that that some money from sale of the subdivision land at the back of the township could be directed into reserve acquisition.
Yes, look, I'll keep this brief because in the interest of time, I wanted to reiterate the potential benefits of a local planning effort, and this applies both in the minimalist focus on the village centre Godley House site itself, which is the one of only 2 commercially zoned pieces of land on the entire side of our harbour, the other being a bare block of land in Church Bay. So to keep in mind that in terms of the community achieving what was defined as its vision through our consultation over 2 or 3 years post-earthquake, the value of planning for that would be that residents can understand the future development pathways and the potentials for that site. People can plan for their involvement directly or indirectly in that planning. Commercial opportunities are understood and can be realised, supporting the growing population in a timely manner. So in other words, we're not just reactive to council planning processes. And the community are really very well endowed with skilled and passionate people willing to take ownership of regional development and work in partnership with local stakeholders such as the council at ECAN. We've demonstrated that through the MOU on Morgan's Gully and the planting that Richard talked to. And certainly, historically, we've developed our own medical centre, albeit on council land that you were looking to sell, and that was a local community effort, which is an extremely important asset for our side of the harbour, given the ageing demographic there in part. So I would encourage you to consider funding us for a planning effort around that site, and partly to assuage the community's concerns around the potential for that site to be divested from council assets. And we understand the imperative for that approach, but nonetheless I think the community would like to take some comfort from that. The other point that I would wish to make on a personal note is around the sale of assets that the council is considering. I like to use the household analogy, and that essentially is that if I had a house and I had some extra assets which were nice to have but not absolutely necessary, and I was facing a dire financial situation, I would sell those assets to reduce my cash flow burden. And I think that my submission is that the council should consider that action, and that really falls within the Local Government Act defined responsibility, which is to meet the current and future needs of communities. And I think that the current needs outweigh the future needs. And the economic rationale for that is that the compounding effect of the rating increase being proposed far outweighs the benefit of future dividend streams from those assets. In terms of the impact on communities, you would never alleviate the rating increase impact on the rating population with the dividend stream of those assets. And that's a position that I take. I think finally the sale of surplus land needs to be a notified activity, as we've talked to, and I think we need to see the methodology for defining what is operationally redundant land and properties within the corporate real estate portfolio. I think that methodology needs to be transparent to the public right across Christchurch. It seemed that there was a very narrow and limited range of properties included in that proposed fast-track land sales, and so we'd take some comfort from seeing that methodology and ensuring that all wards were treated equally under that. So thank you for your time. If there's any questions.
Just interested in your comments around particularly Orion. You talk about it being, because it's a regulatory framework, power consumers are protected from any adverse monopolistic actions by new owners. We've heard quite a few submissions that Wellington, who privatised or sold off their power company, that they have huge issues when they have natural disasters because of the underinvestment in their network. So that's not necessarily covered by a regulatory framework. Do you have any thoughts as to the impact that a private company would have in terms of our lines network when it comes to adverse effects such as natural disasters?
Yes,
and if there's any benefit of having it remaining in public ownership for that?
Yes, I do. So my background is reasonably broad in the electricity sector. So I understand that yes, there's a regulatory framework around a CPI adjustment, CPI plus X adjustment, but the need for a readjustment in terms of capital investment following a major event such as an earthquake, as we've seen in Christchurch, and Orion have dealt with that in their way, but have been constrained to some extent by that regulation around lifting prices. My understanding is there can be a reset on the basis of investment in capital to bring the network back up to the regulatory standards for service provision. But I would have thought that was open to a company, whether it was privately or owned by a council. So on balance, I don't see that as being or preventing the sale of Orion. If they were to want to raise funds to meet those capital needs, they would do that under their current ownership.
My question was slightly misunderstood. Yeah.
Thank you.